everybody, and welcome into another edition of NFL Live. As always, glad to have you with us. Us being Trey Wingo, Mark Schlereth, the GOAT, Jerry Rice, and continuing his two-day stint in a future career bid, perhaps, Lions wide receiver Nate Burleson. Look, hey, guys, all signs positive in Washington. Not, of course, for the looming fiscal cliff, but when it comes to RG3 back under center for the Washington Redskins. RG3 will return to the starting lineup Sunday at Philadelphia unless he suffers a setback before then. That, according to Redskins head coach Mike Shanahan. Griffin, of course, did not play last week as he continues to recover from that grade 1 LCL sprain in his right knee. For the very latest on this, let us bring in ESPN insider extraordinaire Adam Schefter. Adam, sounds great, but there's still that caveat from Mike Shanahan, barring a setback. How convinced are the Skins he'll be there?
Trey, they've thought all week long the signs pointed to RG3 being able to play on Sunday. Even on Monday, when they were starting to put together their game plan, they thought that RG3 would be good enough to go. And so far in practice this week, he hasn't had any setbacks. He's looked strong. He's looked like he's ready to go. He does not yet have clearance from the doctors, which is the only hesitation right now that stands between RG3 and starting on Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles. But the feeling in that organization has been that they believe that when Sunday does roll around, that medical clearance will be given and that RG3 will be playing quarterback.
All right, Adam, stay right there. We'll get back to you in just a minute. Nate, let's start with you. When you hear that, barring a setback, RG3 should be out there, what jumps to your mind immediately?
Two things. One is physically he may be able to tough it out. I like tough guys. And if he does that, I want to ask you, mentally, are you going to be able to do what you have done all year? A lot of guys can tough out injuries, but he might be thinking, can I go out there and move like I used to move? Can I go out there and make the plays? Or might I slide out of bounds or run out of bounds if somebody's coming to hit me? The second thing when I hear barring a setback is Cousins, get ready. That second-string quarterback or second-string guy behind whoever could possibly have a setback is probably preparing the most he's ever prepared all year this week.
Well, it's interesting because RG3, Jerry, was clearly adamant last week saying, hey, I'm good to go. I'm ready to go. What changes in that offense if he's out there?
I think everything, because this guy, you know, he's exciting. He's the playmaker. And I think, Nate, he's a very smart individual. And he feels like he's ready to go. And he's going to be able to run that read option, take the ball down, make that defensive end come down, get outside, and turn on the burners. So I don't think this guy is one of those guys that feels like, okay, I got to get back out on the football field. You know, yes, it was a nice experience for him to watch Cousins last week go out there and win that football game. But I think with RG3, he's a very smart individual, and he knows that he's ready to get back out there.
Hey, it's nice to watch your team win, not necessarily nice to watch the guy who replaces you play really well. So that's another motivating factor. But I agree with you in that it's not just about playing hurt. We've always heard this in this league. You've got to play hurt. You have to play injured. But the key is you have to play well while you're injured. And that's exactly what they need out of RG3. You look at this offense, the way this offense will change. They went entirely West Coast offense last week, and that was the old Mike Shanahan offense. This week, it'll go back to RG3, that read option where 34% of it, or 50% of it is read option stuff, a little bit of that West Coast stuff. Now you're talking about flipping that script a little bit, all that read option stuff as opposed to the West Coast stuff that they ran last week with Kirk Cousins. So it really gives a defense two things to prepare for, two separate offenses essentially to prepare for.
It'll be interesting, too, to see how much they try with him early on that sprint option to see if that knee is really good to go and how much that continues throughout the game against the Philadelphia Eagles. So all kinds of positive news on the depth at quarterback for the Redskins. We're going completely the other way with the New York Jets, where they have all kinds of quarterback issues. Rich Cimini of ESPNNewYork.com says the Jets are exploring all options, including possibly trading Mark Sanchez away. That, according to league sources. Sanchez, of course, benched this week in favor of Greg McElroy, who will make his first start this Sunday at home against the Chargers. The Jets also, per Cimini sources, are planning to part ways with the punt protector, the 3rd-and-1 guy, number 15, Tim Tebow, who essentially has had no part of their offensive game plan all season anyway. Tebow passed over this week when the Jets went from Sanchez to 3rd-stringer Greg McElroy. All right, plenty to get in here. Let's go back to Adam, and let's start with the former starter, Mark Sanchez. If they're going to try and trade him, what exactly is his market value? I mean, he's had more turnovers the last 2 years than anyone in the NFL, Adam.
It's not much, Trey. It would be the exact same reason that the Jets are looking to get rid of him. Essentially, you're looking at teams out there. Why would they be interested in trading for Mark Sanchez with his contract being what it is, with the inflated numbers, with the lack of production, with a quarterback whose psyche has been beaten down this season from everything that he's gone through? It's a difficult proposition. Maybe there'll be somebody out there willing to take him on as a reclamation project at this point in time. But the market at best for Mark Sanchez, who once was the 5th overall pick, is minimal at best, and the Jets will be lucky to recoup a late-round draft pick in return.
Adam, with that in mind, you mentioned the contract. It's $8.25 million the Jets are on the hook for, whether he plays there or not. Would someone have to, or would Sanchez have to be willing to renegotiate that contract to facilitate a trade?
Yes, but there's so much money guaranteed in that contract that there's really not a lot of motivation for him to renegotiate that contract. And maybe the Jets could chip in and pay off some of that contract and maybe pay off $5 of the $8.25 million as a goodwill gesture to facilitate a deal. But no matter how you look at it, Trey, it's a difficult proposition for the Jets to navigate themselves out of at this point in time.
Okay, they're also trying to navigate their way out of the Tebow situation, it seems. Tebow himself has already referred to his time with the Jets in the past tense, but he signed through 2014. If the market is minimal for Sanchez, what is it for Tim Tebow?
Well, the difference is Tim Tebow's contract is not cumbersome like Mark Sanchez's is. But if you go back to last offseason, essentially there was limited interest in Tim Tebow at that point, and that was before this year where he didn't play very much for the New York Jets. Last year was minimal when he had led the Denver Broncos to a playoff victory over the Pittsburgh Steelers. The only teams interested in him at that point in time were the Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars coaching staff and front office didn't want any part of Tim Tebow. The owner, Shad Khan, did. The owner's still there. And maybe the owner imposes his will and says, this player would be good for our organization and good for everything it represents. And maybe he orders something to get done. But short of that, again, minimal interest out there for Tim Tebow as well.
And Adam, this really brings us to the crux of the matter here. What exactly is the plan for the Jets going forward at the most important position in team sports in this country, quarterback?
And that ultimately is the biggest question, Trey. And they're going to take a look at Greg McElroy because they do like his intangibles and they want to see what he has in the final 2 games. So they take a look at McElroy. But when you look at the free agent quarterback list, the most attractive name out there is expected to be Michael Vick, who the Eagles are expected to release after this season. Do the Jets make a run at Michael Vick? That's always possible, but we don't know who's going to be making the call for the Jets, who's going to be coaching the Jets right now. So Vick certainly would be one possibility. Do you trade for Alex Smith? Do you pull the trigger on another deal out there for another trade for the New York Jets at this point in time? There's no clear-cut solution. And this draft in April is nothing like the draft last April that produced Andrew Luck and RG3 and Russell Wilson and Kirk Cousins and some of the quarterbacks who have made their mark this year. So if you're counting on finding a quarterback in the draft in April, your team can be disappointed. Basically, it leaves the Jets in a very difficult quandary at this point in time.
Adam, no question. Then you add in Brandon Whedon, Ryan Tannehill. It was a quarterback-rich draft a year ago. I'm always reminded about this thing, Mark, as we discuss the Jets and where do they go. If you miss with a quarterback early on, even with the salary cap change the way it is now, it sets back your organization so much. How do they fix it? Where do they go? I mean, these names, Michael Vick, Alex Smith, Vince Young, those are the ones that might potentially be out there.
Well, there's nothing that really excites you about that, so I think you have to build a team the way you always have to build a team, from the inside out. You've got to dominate lines of scrimmage. You've got to go back to the ground and pound philosophy that they had for years, and you have to hope that you land one late in the draft or you find a guy in free agency that's been in a situation where it just hasn't panned out for him, and you surround him with enough components to where he can be successful. And that's truly what it comes down to. You've got to have people around you. Yeah. There are only so many quarterbacks out there that are franchise type of guys that can take anybody on that roster and make them legitimate players. Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees. You guys know the guys. You guys got one in Detroit, in Matthew Stafford. He's a great young player. But there's only a few of those guys out there in this league, Jerry.
Yeah, and I think with Mike Tannenbaum, he just did a bad job with the players that he brought in. You look at Mark Sanchez. To me, Mark Sanchez, he's not a good quarterback. Tim Tebow, pretty much a gimmick from the start. Right. They had no intentions on playing this guy. And plus, I think with Tim Tebow, he should have known when they told him to get up to 255 pounds that, come on,
No
he's way
quarterback
too big.
plays at 260 unless you're Ben Roethlisberger.
So I think they need to just bring some fresh blood in there. Get rid of all of those guys, like an abomination. Get rid of all of those guys, then bring some fresh blood in.
The question is who you're going to bring in. And Nate, along those lines, what do people in the league think about the Jets and their quarterback situation? What do people say?
You know, it's kind of amusing. You know, I always joke about the NFL being the biggest soap opera in sports. And the Jets prove it week in and week out, the merry-go-round in which they have in their quarterback position. And like you said, the quarterback position is the most coveted position. That is supposed to be the staple, the foundation of every team. And when it's so chaotic, especially going into another season, 2013, who knows what's going to happen? So you got to imagine the other guys in the locker room. Everybody's talking about the quarterbacks, but look at the other guys. What are they thinking? What are the receivers thinking? Who am I going to be running routes for? Who's going to be throwing me the ball come off season? So it's really going to be interesting to see how this works out come 2013.
Not only that, but you mentioned receivers. They need better receivers. They had Santonio Holmes. He went down early. Stephen Hill was just put on injury reserve, the kid they took in the second round from Georgia Tech. At this point, the Jets are looking at all possible situations for answers anywhere they can find them. When we continue here on this edition of NFL Live, you know who's not looking for issues at quarterback? That would be the Seattle Seahawks, and what to make of their big home game Sunday with the 49ers come to town and the potential to win the division still in play. Also, Ben Roethlisberger upset with the play calling Sunday. What's his relationship with his OC now? We'll talk about that when we continue.